sunlight and the lapping of the now calm waves began to stir the sleeping little girl on the beach. Quickly opening her eyes, she realized she was lying in shallow water, nestled in an inlet of soft sand. Confusion and fear gripped her as she wondered where she was and how she had gotten there. She began to tremble as the vague memories of bright, loud, booming flashes of light invaded her mind from the night before. She could not remember who she was or where she had come from. She couldn't even remember her own name. "I must be brave," she whispered as she looked around the lonely beach. "I must be brave," she said again. Somewhere, deep within her hidden memory, she remembered, "When you are scared, shout, 'I am brave!' The more scared you are, the louder you shout." She wanted to scream it right now because she was very scared. She knew she must try to find help, so the little girl slowly stood to her feet and started off down the beach. "I am brave," she shouted. "I am brave," she whispered again as a tear ran down her cheek. She walked for hours hoping to find someone, but there was no one to be found. She was so tired, hungry, and thirsty, and it was getting dark. She would need to find a place to rest before the sun went down. Straining her eyes, she noticed a mountain of rocks that rose high into the clouds. She walked closer. She saw an opening, a huge opening, and a cave, larger than she had ever seen before, or so she thought, if she could only remember. She walked up to the cave and hesitantly walked into the opening. It was very dark inside. Her eyes were straining to make out shapes. An overturned table, a chair, and bones. "I must be brave," she thought. "I am brave," she shouted. Unexpectedly, a loud voice boomed, "You must be brave to enter my cave." The little girl jumped, knocking over the chair. Her heart began to pound so hard that she thought it might jump right out of her. "No one is allowed to enter here." It was a terrible voice, big and scary. The little girl looked toward the direction of the voice to ask, "Who are you, and why do you hide in the shadows?" "Silly girl, you must leave, now!" The voice was so loud the ground shook, and the little girl wanted to run from the cave. It was so tempting, but oddly she did not run. Instead, she faced the voice and pleaded, "I have nowhere to go." "Enough!" Then the voice went silent. It had long since become dark outside, and the little girl was very cold and hungry, but most of all tired. Shivering, she sat down near a trickling fountain of water. She was so thirsty from the long walk down the beach. Then a very strange thing happened. Out of the darkness came fire. A pile of wood near her burst into flames. The fire warmed the girl as she lay down and settled into a deep sleep. Morning came with the aroma of food and the loud noise of her stomach growling. Through sleepy eyes, she searched the room to find near her the table and chair had been set up right, and on the table was warm food. She ran to the table in delight. It was so good. Confused by the hospitality, she asked, "Are you there?" She expected to hear a rough, scary response from the darkness, but there was only silence. The little girl spent the rest of the day searching the beach for others. "If I could only remember something, anything," she thought. She wondered about the voice in the darkness. Was it real? Her little mind was spinning with questions, but there were no answers. Having nowhere else to go, she found her way back to the cave. She felt so alone. She found her place against the wall again and lay down to rest. Then suddenly, as the night before, out of the darkness came the fire. A fresh pile of lumber burst into flames and warmth filled the cave. "Thank you," she said, louder than normal, to ensure that if someone were there, they would hear her gesture of gratitude. There was no response, but she knew he was there, hiding in the darkness. She could feel his presence, and strangely, she felt very safe. She soon fell asleep. The next morning was like the first. "Good morning," she said. "I know you are there. Are you ever going to speak to me again?" she asked in her loud voice. "I have had no one to talk to for a long time," said the voice from the darkness. "What is your name?" the girl asked. "What good is a name if no one speaks it?" was his response. There was a long silence. Then the cave was filled with the sad sounds of a little girl sobbing. "You have a name and don't want it. I have a name but cannot remember it." she cried as she ran out of the cave. The little girl sat alone on the beach all day and watched the sun go down. She longed for home, but sadly she had no idea what home was like. The cave, she remembered. Turning, she looked over her shoulder, and suddenly a warm feeling came over her. There in the darkness she saw a warm glow coming from the normally dark cave. A small smile appeared on her sad face as she stared at the cave. Maybe she was home. The days began to be filled with challenges and adventure. Every day, new treasures could be found washed up on the beach. The little girl delighted at the items the mystery voice would leave for her. It soon became a game to see who could find the best treasure. Their bond of friendship grew stronger each day. The girl learned much from the voice about facing fears and accepting those who were different, and the voice began to endearingly call her Little One, and he learned about trust and friendship. The voice took good care of the little girl, and she was very happy as she grew into a beautiful and brave young lady. One day the voice noticed the girl was very sad. "Where is my brave girl?" he asked. She turned and snapped, "I am brave!" "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm not sure," she whispered, turning away from the voice. Maybe she wasn't sure, but he knew, and he knew it was time. He knew she needed to find the answers she so desperately longed for, and to find them, she would need to seek them on her own. The next morning she awoke to see food packed into a small sack and clothes lay neatly out. She turned and stared into the darkness. "It is time, little one," said the voice. "Time for what?" she asked a little nervously. "Time for you to continue your search," the voice said sadly. There was silence from both for a long time. She just sat there, not knowing what to say or do. Remembering her first day on the beach, she once again felt alone and scared. She knew he was right. She had been longing for answers for a long time. "I am brave," she finally said out loud. "It is time for you to make your journey towards home," the voice said. This time he spoke with authority, and there was wisdom in his words. "Just remember, the unknown is an adventure, and do not fear it. There is so much I cannot teach you, and there is so much you need to learn," the voice said in a way that was still unusual for him. "But I will miss you," she shouted. "And I will miss you," he said softly. She wasn't sure she heard him, but she knew what he meant. She picked up her few belongings, removing the most precious item she owned. It was a pendant, the only memory she possessed from her past. She placed it on the table as a reminder of their friendship. "Goodbye, dear friend," she said as she started toward the entrance of the cave. As she stepped out into the light, the sun warmed her face. She was sad to leave all she knew, but strangely ready for the next adventure into the unknown. "Dargon." She stopped. "Dargon," the voice said. "That is my name." She smiled and kept walking. She loved her friend. It would be a long time until she would hear his voice again. "I am brave, Dargon," she shouted as she walked down the beach. Then from the darkness a chuckle could be heard. "Yes, you are, little one." The rest of the day she reflected on her time with Dargon and the few memories she had of a prior life. She knew she had a family. She could vaguely remember her mother's blue eyes and curling up in her arms as she sang to her. She knew her father was strong and brave, and they both had loved her very much. She wondered if she would ever see them again, and how she would know them. "I am brave," she thought as she walked deeper and deeper into the woods, not knowing what she would encounter next. The sun began to quickly descend behind the tall mountains that loomed before her, growing darker and darker. It was becoming very hard to follow the path, so she sat down and pulled out the sack Dargon had packed for her. As she unwrapped it, a strange glow began to shine around her. She smiled. It was a glowing teardrop, fashioned into a beautiful jewel pendant. He had thought of her too. He had told her how rare and valuable teardrop jewels were while telling one of his many stories of magical creatures. Legend was, if a tear should escape one of these creatures and fall to the ground, the tear would crystallize into a glowing jewel. The person who held the teardrop had the power to unlock unknown mysteries. She held the jewel gently in her hands and thought of Dargon. As she hung the jewel around her neck, suddenly, lights began to appear all around her. Entranced, she stopped and watched the vision of dancing lights. It was so beautiful. Beams of light began to descend in front of her, revealing a path she knew she must follow. In the distance, a bright light appeared. She realized as it grew in size that it was coming toward her. It was a warm light, one she felt safe in, and the shape of a woman began to emerge wearing a crown of stars. Beams of colorful light glowed all around her. "I am Moonbeam," she said, "and you are very brave to travel alone." "I am brave," she said, her voice quivering for a brief second. Moonbeam, sensing her hesitation, stretched her arms toward her and said, "Come, rest, you are safe now." She woke up the next day curled up amidst a sea of flowers, bright, happy flowers everywhere. As her sleepy eyes began to focus, she realized she was not with Moonbeam any longer, but curled up in someone's lap. She could hear the sound of laughter somewhere in the distance. As she turned and looked up, a very kind face was grinning at her. "Hello, my name is Eden," she said with kindness. "The teardrop jewel you possess has allowed you to enter our hidden forest." She smiled, realizing Dargon had provided the way. She knew she had found her next adventure. "Where is Moonbeam?" she asked. "Moonbeam is of the night. She is only visible after the sun goes down. We have all been expecting you." There were flowers everywhere. As they swayed with the gentle blowing of the wind, their enchanting perfume filled the air around her. She realized the laughter she had heard earlier was coming from tiny ladybugs that were tending to the garden. In the distance, another form was standing, gracefully waving her arms in the air. Thousands of tiny ladybugs moved in each direction she pointed. "Come, I will introduce you to Ladybug," said Eden. Ladybug stopped her motioning and turned to greet her. She learned that Ladybug had a special purpose, and that was helping others. "Everyone has a purpose, and I sense that yours is special too," said Ladybug. They seemed to know a lot about her. They knew she did not know who she was, that she did not have a name, and that she had a special purpose. It was decided a special Harmony of Lights would be called to choose a name befitting her. As the moment of harmony approached, the woods became silent. There was an excitement in the air that something magical was about to happen. A Harmony of Lights was only called for special occasions. As the sun began to make its way behind the moon, the darkness began to spread across the forest. Everything became dark. Then suddenly, the magic began. As the light infused into darkness, the darkness was melting as a bright light appeared and spectacular forms and shapes from the dark began to emerge. Then, there she was, Moonbeam. Moonbeam, Eden, and Ladybug, known as the Trillium, floated as if on a cloud. Their magical powers grew stronger as they stood as one. They began to converse, every once in a while looking in her direction. Suddenly, she felt herself begin to float. She was being drawn into the circle of light where the Trillium stood. They turned and looked at her. "We have agreed that your light has a special quality," said Moonbeam. "Yes," said Eden, "a kindness the kingdom has not seen for a long time." "Your purpose is special and will involve the joy that shines from within you," said Ladybug. "We have decided to give you a name of honor to suit your bravery, kindness, and the joy you will bring to the kingdom. From now on, you shall be called Lisbeth." A hush was heard throughout the woods, for all that heard it knew it was a name forbidden and yet most cherished. Lisbeth. As she said it aloud, she thought, yes, it sounded just right. "I am Lisbeth," she said. Suddenly a cheer went up and everyone began to clap. It was a special moment, and Lisbeth knew she was meant for something important. Time had stood still during the Harmony of Lights, but now it began to move ahead again as the sun began its transition back to its place in the sky. The newfound friends that appeared during the harmony waved goodbye to Lisbeth, promising to see her again soon. It was truly a magical day. She learned much while helping to tend the garden with Eden and Ladybug, happily help others, and never complain. She spent many a night with Moonbeam, bravely encountering hidden dangers in the forest, while learning the wisdom of settling conflict through kindness. The days turned into months, as Lisbeth spent time with her friends in the forest. But the day came, much like the day came with Dargon, that she knew she must move on. There were still questions she needed answers to, and a purpose she had yet to fulfill. She must be brave yet again and seek the unknown. The Trillium, presenting her with gifts, said cheerful yet tearful goodbyes. knowing their paths would cross again one day, soon. As she began her journey, she held a teardrop in her hands, awaiting her magical exit from the hidden forest. This time, instead of a bright light, a heavy fog began to descend around her. She then touched the crown of light given to her by Moonbeam. A path began to emerge before her as she remembered to bravely follow the light in her heart. She smelled the flower of harmony she wore from Eden, and knew she could handle the next season of her life with wisdom and kindness. She began to laugh at the ladybug on her shoulders, who would always remind her she had a special purpose. Meanwhile, a knight was nearby watering his horse. He was tired from his nightly duties of protecting the kingdom. His most recent adventure nearly cost him his life. The danger was nearby, and he was homeward bound to inform the king. He stopped. What was that sound? All was silent except the babbling brook. No, there it was again. He drew his sword and began to walk toward the sound. In the distance was a shape moving through the woods. He could not take his eyes off the vision he saw before him. He heard her laugh again and quietly put away his sword. "Excuse me, what are you doing out here in the woods alone?" he asked. She turned, startled, as someone had approached without her knowledge. "What nerve you have sneaking up on me like that," she said. "I am brave. Shall I not venture into the woods alone?" "It is not wise to wander in these woods," he said. "You are right, because people sneak up on you," she replied. Secretly, she was excited to finally find someone like her. But he was not what she had expected. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Can you take me there?" "And why should I do that, when you obviously want to be alone?" he replied. That was all she could take. It had been a long day. Tears began to well up in her eyes and her lips began to quiver. He began to melt. "Come, brave one. I will take you to the kingdom of Atrilia. My name is Galaron." "My name is Lisbeth," she said. He looked at her in shock. "You cannot have that royal name," he said. "It is forbidden." "Forbidden or not, it is my name," she replied with pride. He had to admit she had to be brave to carry that name, and she did appear to handle herself like royalty. "You must not tell anyone it is your name, or you will be taken to the king," he said. "That is silly. It is my name." "I will be brave and go before the king," she said defiantly. Galaron had never met anyone quite like her. She was brave and very beautiful. And so the banter continued for the next couple of hours. Nightfall was approaching quickly. Galaron, concerned for the safety of his new traveling companion, knew they would need to find shelter soon. There were many dangers in the forest, especially at night, and they were still a good day's ride from the kingdom. Up ahead he spotted a meadow. Near the meadow was a cave opening. It would be perfect for the night. Strangely, during his many travels, he had never noticed it before that day. Lisbeth, seeing the cave, was delighted as memories of the voice came to mind. She began to giggle as she entered the cave, shouting, "I am brave!" Galaron, amusement on his face, just watched as she searched the cave looking for what? He didn't know. He asked her what she was up to, but Lisbeth just turned and giggled with a mysterious twinkle in her eye. It was a secret she had promised to keep. Galaron gathered up wood, and soon the cave was filled with the warmth of a cozy fire. This also brought back fond memories. Lisbeth yawned. It had been a long day. She watched as Galaron took moss in his cape and made a soft bed for her, and then offered her a loaf of bread and cheese. Were all people as thoughtful as him, she wondered? Feeling safe in the cave, she settled down to sleep. Galaron took a position near the entrance of the cave to keep watch. Lisbeth noticed her teardrop begin to glow. She wondered why. She drifted off to sleep. Something awoke her. What was it? There it was again. She thought she heard someone. She looked over at Galaron, but he was still at his post. Thinking it was safe, she picked up a torch and began to move quickly toward the back of the cave. The sound had stopped, but still curious and awake now, she moved deeper into the cave. Lisbeth noticed her teardrop begin to glow even brighter. So bright, she really did not need the torch. She remembered what her friends had told her about it unlocking magical mysteries, and wondered if a mystery were nearby. She noticed the glow reflecting off a wall near a deep ravine, revealing what looked like ancient markings of creatures she did not recognize. As she studied the wall, she wondered if it told a story. Suddenly, Lisbeth sensed a presence, not like the voice, but an evil presence. Something brushed against her. She turned. She felt a force pulling her toward the edge of the ravine. Reaching to grab a rock, she slipped and fell. As darkness began to envelop her, she felt the pulling force suddenly stop. The next thing she knew, she was being carried. Then everything went black as she felt herself slipping away. Lisbeth awoke with her head aching, and Galaron sitting beside her. She jumped, remembering the frightening presence. Galaron, steadying her, began to ask what had happened. She told him about the markings on the wall, the strange presence, and the force that was pulling her. She began to tremble at the memory of feeling so helpless. Galaron held her tightly, assuring her he had searched the cave and there was nothing there now, not even the markings on the wall. Galaron thought about what she had seen and resolved to soon return and investigate. Lisbeth, recovering from her scare in the cave, wondered if she had fallen and imagined everything. One thing she knew for sure, Galaron had rescued her, and she was grateful. He was strong, kind, and handsome. And so the journey began again. The time flew by as they talked, and Lisbeth asked questions about Atrilia. She smiled when she thought she could hear people in the distance. Vague memories began to flash in her mind. Turning a corner, the kingdom of Atrilia loomed before her. She was breathless at the beautiful sight before her. A huge castle, nestled between gardens and waterfalls. Have I been here before, she wondered? People like her were everywhere. They stared at her as she rode before them with the night. Who was this beautiful girl, and where did she come from, they whispered. It wasn't long before everyone in Atrilia was talking about the beautiful girl found in the woods named Lisbeth. The king, who was waiting anxiously on Galaron's report of his journey, was distraught to hear of the girl, and demanded that Galaron bring her along with him. The knight escorted her to the king's throne room. I have news of grave danger, said Galaron. An evil adversary approaches. I discovered him on the beach near the outskirts of Atrilia. I have come to advise you that an attack is coming. He approaches even now. The king could not take his eyes off the girl. There was something about her, an inner radiance he had not seen in years. What is your name? Asked the queen, who was sitting nearby. Lisbeth, she replied, turning to look at the queen. How dare you carry the name of Lisbeth, the queen declared. It is forbidden to mention that name. I am sorry, your majesty, but it is my name, she said. Silently the queen watched her, her presence reminding her of a daughter who had disappeared so many years ago, which had brought great sadness to Atrilia. The king turned to Galaron. You must gather up the warriors and prepare for this attack. I will decide what to do with her later. Please, sir, said Galaron. I will keep her in my charge until then. So be it, said the king. And so Galaron took her to a place where he knew she would be safe. He recognized she was special and knew he must protect her. His heart was melting as she turned to smile and thank him for his kindness. Lisbeth remembered the words she had heard the day before. Found him on the beach? A threat? Could it be, she wondered? She sat close to the window, watching and waiting to catch a glimpse of the threat approaching. She had never seen the voice, but she knew it could be frightening. She knew what she must do. The knights began to move as one toward the dark silhouette in the distance. The ground shook as the shape suddenly began to move toward the castle. Closer and closer it came, inflaming fear into the hearts and minds of everyone present. The king became enraged as he recognized the pendant on the creature, a gift he had given to his missing daughter. We must be brave, shouted the king to the knights. He knew they would fight to the end to save the kingdom. The casualties would be high. Yes, very high, yet again. Then suddenly another shape appeared, moving toward the creature, a small figure hidden under a cape. The figure walked through the wall of knights and up to the very face of the creature. This infuriated the creature, and he began to draw back to let loose his flame of fire on the poor, brave, but ignorant soul. The creature hesitated as the figure lowered the cape that had covered her head. He laughed. It was a woman. Silly girl, you must leave now, he shouted. Galaron, fearing for Lisbeth's life, drew his sword and ran to defend her. I am brave, she said loudly to the creature. Galaron stopped. He saw the confusion on the creature's face. The others watched in awe as she bravely stood before the massive creature. I am brave, she shouted. And then, there, on his chest, Lisbeth saw it, the pendant she had left the mystery voice long ago. Recognition began to flicker in each of their eyes. "Dargon?" she whispered. "Dargon?" she said louder. As she pulled out her magical teardrop, it began to glow brightly. "It is me, little one. Why do you come to destroy the people you sent me to find?" Lisbeth turned to the king and knights, who were looking on in fascination. "Why do you come to destroy my friend Dargon?" she asked. "When I was a little girl, he took care of me. I was lost on the beach and he gave me a home. He taught me to not fear the unknown, but to embrace it." The creature turned toward the king and said, "I am Dargon. Do not fear me. I do not wish to be your enemy." The king's face began to change from one of sadness to joy. Could it be? The king looked from Dargon to Lisbeth. He told them how his daughter had disappeared many years ago. He told them of the many days he had searched for her, but to no avail. They eventually assumed the worst. The king began to smile as he realized his long-lost daughter had come home. Lisbeth turned to look at the king, understanding beginning to dawn across her face. She ran to her father with happy tears in her eyes. She was finally home. She was Princess Lisbeth. She was fulfilling her special purpose, and like her father, she was very brave. The news of Princess Lisbeth's return began to spread throughout the kingdom of Atrelia. Her magical adventures with Dargon and the Trillium were told over and over again to young and old alike. They marveled at her bravery as she journeyed from one adventure to the next. Her mother, anxious for her daughter's memory to return, told her stories about her childhood. Princess Lisbeth remembered happy days playing with friends in the castle and gardens. She also remembered when she was afraid of the dark, her father would tell her to shout, "I am brave." She could remember hearing him chuckle many a night when she would shout at the monsters in the darkness of her imagination, "I am brave." The king soon announced a royal celebration was in order. The news of the event spread all the way to the magical friends in the forest. The Trillium, already aware, were excitedly making arrangements to attend. They knew it would be the beginning of new adventures to come for Princess Lisbeth, and also for the kingdom of Atrelia. The celebration was destined to be a magical event. A harmony of lights would occur so that all the creatures of the day and night could attend. The kingdom had never heard of such an event, so the excitement grew as the day approached. Finally, the day arrived. Thousands of Atrillians gathered to meet Dargon, who had helped Princess Lisbeth so long ago. The excitement began to build as they waited in anticipation. A hush was heard as light began to meld into darkness. Beams of light began to flash as Moonbeam, Eden, and Ladybug appeared, followed by the magical creatures. Everyone stood in awe at the enchantment happening before their eyes. Suddenly, Princess Lisbeth appeared at the entrance, escorted by Galaron. A cheer rose up from the crowd as he guided her to the center of the ballroom where the Trillium stood. It was the beginning of a beautiful celebration of friends and family, and the introduction of magic to the kingdom of Atrelia. Dargon, still preferring to be alone, endured with patience and awkwardness all the attention he was receiving. Once the threat of destruction, he was now a protector and friend of Atrelia. He had missed Little One, and was relieved she had finally made it home safely. Dargon was the only one of his kind, and he understood how alone she had felt that first day in his cave. Lisbeth brought him joy, and now joy would reign again in the kingdom of Atrelia. "Dargon?" "Yes, Little One. I have a name now. Lisbeth." "Yes, Lisbeth," he smiled, "but you will always be my little one."